This is Scott Richmond.
And Arnie Sherman.
You're listening to What Do You Know on Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 1015 FM. Good morning, Arnie Sherman. How are you this morning?
I'm good, but you're better because this is the show that you've been waiting to have since we began working together a year and a half ago. This is the Lou Reed Show.
It is.
And for our listeners who have who really want to know your background with Lou, why don't you recap your special relationship with experimental rock artist and living God.
Living God?
Yes.
He's no longer living.
Well, he's living in archives and in memory and in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But what is your connection
Arnie,
with
I
Lou
will
Reed?
say this, okay? When I moved here in 2013, Lou Reed was alive, and I had spent 12 years working with him and had a friendship with him and did a lot of cool things with him. He knew my family. He knew my children. I knew his family. And we just started working together. I grew up a fan of his. And in 2002, I had the good fortune of meeting him. And I was supposed to meet him for a half hour for coffee. We spent 3.5 hours talking about everything. And I said, I can help you with your career or whatever, with marketing your music. I forget what the premise was. And at that point, it just turned into a good work relationship. And from there, a very good personal relationship. And so when he died in 2013, I had a lot of experience and a lot of information, just a lot of good feelings about him. And, I've been able to work with his wife and now the archives. And
his wife being Laurie Anderson, the
his wife being
performance artist.
Right, Laurie Anderson. And, today we're going to talk to one of his chief archivists, Don Fleming. And we're going to talk about the work that Don has taken up since 2013 and just how important it's been. And, a lot's happened in the last 3 years, and they've just announced a major deal with the New York Public Library.
Well, that's very cool. And I do say, Lou, the living legend, because with music, you're never gone, right?
Right.
Every day, practically, for sure, somewhere on the radio waves, Lou Reed songs are being played.
Yes.
And even though he was not a, commercial success in the general sense of the word, Rolling Stone magazine, which is maybe the definitive magazine on music, considered his 67 recording with the Velvet Underground and Nico one of maybe the three most formative albums of all time. Sgt. Pepper's, the Velvet Underground with Nico, and Blonde on Blonde.
Bob Dylan.
Those three are considered on par with each other.
Right.
So I think this might be useful for our listeners who want a little bit more of a music education, in honor of last week was would have been Lou's 75th birthday.
Right.
To learn more about somebody who was a little bit under the radar for a lot of folks.
Right.
But is considered one of the experimental creators of contemporary music, and in fact, the best quote about Lou Reed that I think basically sums him up. Rolling Stone said he married beauty and noise.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
And that's a great way of describing the kind of music that Lou Reed did from Sweet Jane to Walk on the Wild Side. The early song Heroin, which always resonated with me from the Velvet Underground and Nico album to rock and roll. He only had one or two songs that made it on the pop charts, Walk on the Wild Side being the biggest one. But his influence was so much deeper than that. And the fact that we now have this archive of all of his treasures is really going to be important for the music industry as a whole to be able to rely on and use and dig into. And it'll be interesting today for me, and I'm sure for you, to talk with Don Fleming about this collection and about the role and the impact that Lou Reed had on contemporary American music.
I think that's right. I think you hit it on the head when you said he was influential. I think it was Brian Eno that said the first Velvet Underground record only sold 30,000 copies, but everybody that bought a copy started a band.
Right.
Okay, so
Right.
when you think about the influence, it's vast. The other thing I think it's important to note is that his art extended well beyond music.
Right.
To music, photography, poetry, film, Tai Chi. So he was an incredibly well-versed and multi-dimensional and multi-platform artist. And that's what this archive will really give life to. And then the last point I think that's important is that for someone who has been so notoriously known as very closed and guarded and didn't trust many people, but also closed and guarded and didn't want a lot of stuff out there unless it had his imprint, his blessing, to open up his archives and to see how much he saved and how much is
impressive.
now available.
It's very impressive.
This is the juxtaposition of his original output versus what's going to now be available. It's
well, he
earth-shattering.
also, as you know, lived a very interesting and to some extent controversial life. Born on Long Island.
Right.
He had, even in his formative years, issues about his sexuality. His parents put him into, he got shock therapy.
Right.
For several years because
Right.
they were trying to shock him out of his.
Allegedly. We don't
allegedly.
know that to be the truth, though, because there were various reinterpretations of even that
Really?
after his passing by his sister.
Oh, she
and
says.
by his wife, who said his parents were just trying to help him. I mean, I don't want to get into all that. But,
yeah, right.
But they were not anti-homosexual.
Right.
So they were very open, free-minded people. So,
and he expressed all of that in much of his music. It was
Right.
reflective of the angst and his drug abuse. And I mean, he went through
Right.
all of the emotions and all of the repercussions of a rock star
right.
without having to be, at the pinnacle and constantly under the microscope, although in New York he was. I mean, he even got into fights with David Bowie, and I read about, so he was a pretty interesting, flamboyant, and a multifaceted personality.
Absolutely. Well, look, we're going to come back with Don Fleming. You are listening to What Do You Know on KGVO, proudly supported by Don Maddox Glacier Sotheby's International Realty. After this, Don Fleming, archivist for Lou Reed. We are back with our guest, Don Fleming, and you were just listening to Walk on the Wild Side.
Yes, we had to have interspersed in this hour with you, Don, a lot of Lou's music. But to our listeners, why don't you explain to us a little bit about why it's important to have an archive of Lou Reed's music and works?
Well, I think with a lot of artists, they leave behind all this material from their life and their work. And sometimes it doesn't make much sense, and other times it tells you a story. And with Lou's, I mean, he kept a lot of things, and he kept a lot of his business paperwork, of all his tours, of all his studio projects. And so you can look at that stuff and really see things that you didn't know before. So I think, with any artist, it's important, but I think what's strong about Lou's collection is you can really just see the day-to-day, of his life as a musician, in the 20th century and the biggest time for rock and roll music. I mean, you really see everything about the labels, how it works, how you have to make decisions every day on what you're going to license and what you're going to do. It's really interesting. It's like you really see the business side of Lou as a musician, as well as the creative side. But the side that was hidden before, I think, more was the business side.
Don, it's interesting. How were you brought into the project? What were the circumstances?
I was suggested to Laurie Anderson as someone that could help with Lou's material, his archive, through a mutual friend. And I've been consulting for other writers and musicians. I mainly work at the Alan Lomax archive, which I've been there 15 years, and I've worked on Hunter Thompson's collection. Sorry?
So I was just going to say, quite the archive project there with the Lomax.
Well, that's a huge one, yeah. And we went through, having to figure out what we had and copy as much as we could afford to do, but then find a permanent home for it. And that stuff went to the Library of Congress. So I was involved with the acquisition that happened with that, and that's a massive, massive collection, even bigger than Lou's.
Yeah.
But Lou's collection was really substantial. I mean, he really, for whatever reason, he decided to keep a lot of paperwork going all the way back to his first solo shows. I think once he took over as being the boss, and he wasn't just in another band, which in the Velvet Underground they had a manager, and he wasn't really that involved in the business. But once it became his thing and his name, he really did. I mean, he really just, a lot of other people do it too, and people do it on their behalf, but they don't usually keep all the paper.
I'm fascinated that he kept all that, because if you think about his early solo career, and certainly a couple of years in, you always got the sense that it was just very scattered and it was kind of in chaos.
And he was very private.
Yeah, and you always think it was, and he was kind of a wild and crazy musician who did, was sort of on the edge. So you wouldn't think this would be the guy that would also keep the books, right. Not that he did them himself, but he saw that they were done. I mean, and he kept the paperwork. So it's really cool to see them in the middle of a tour in 1975 in Japan, and receipts from stores that where Lou was buying records and stuff. I mean, it's just a really neat way to see inside.
Of an artist who is known to be pretty private and, in some ways sparse in words about himself and about his music.
Yeah, I think that's true too. And I think, for me, it was just a really interesting, when Laurie Anderson asked me to come in and work on it, I had to really help her in the team she had, which was these two great guys, Jason Stern and Jim Cass, who worked for Lou. We put together a team to just go through and figure out what was there, and it took months and months. And all along, Laurie's, goal was, how do we let the most people be able to access this? How do we get this into the hands of, a lot of people and put it somewhere where it's really protected forever?
Sure.
And so that was the goal from the beginning. And so we started looking at what we had, and then what would be the best fit for this? And, the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts, because it's performing arts, to us it was okay, this totally makes sense. A huge part of the collection is Lou as a performer. Just that's the amazing thing is there's hundreds of hours of audio. He taped almost all the shows, it seems
right.
There's, starting in the 70s, there's board tapes that are cassettes, but they sound great. I mean, we've been transferring them, and it's a whole document of his touring. And there's the whole Bottom Line show from the, Take No Prisoners live album. The whole thing is there, days of it.
Wow.
And so, we're just kind of chomping at the bit to be okay, let's talk to the labels and get some of this stuff out. I think a big thing is we want to create a lot more commercial products that can come out from this, and at the same time make it available to the public in a way that people can research it and look at it and come listen to it just for themselves, in a way that is sort of the way the future is going. It's technology is allowing us to share information, and so let's use it in the best way we can. And one of the reasons we wanted to go with the New York Public Library is they have all these branches all across all the boroughs.
Right.
And as it can be shared through, the idea is it's going to start at this one building. People come there to listen to it. But then eventually the other branches are connected in ways where people can listen to it there as well. So, for a public way for people to get to everything, I think it's, this is a great choice. And keeping it in New York was very important because Lou came from New York and documented New York and passed away in New York. So to have, the collection be here, I think was really important.
Our guest is Don Fleming, archivist for Lou Reed. Don, do we know where all of the Velvet Underground or his pre-Velvet Underground and Velvet Underground, did he save any of that? Because I know there's a separate archive that that another gentleman has been curating, and I think it was donated to another university. But did Lou save anything prior to his solo career that's part of our archive here?
Yeah, there's some very, very cool Velvet Underground items in there. There's several posters that are original ones and handbills from shows, Boston Tea Party handbill. There's a lot of, there's not nearly as much Velvet Underground material as there is from the solo career, but there are some very interesting things and some tapes that we're transferring. There's about 15 tapes, and there are things like rough mixes and demos, and Lou walking around with a tape recorder, taping him and Mo in a cab. So it's like we're just figuring out now like what we actually have, and then I think that, and the difference between, that collection you're talking about at Cornell is really nice. That's a great, like you said, curated collection of stuff that came out, that someone was able to put together, and this is not like that. It's not all that stuff, because Lou just wasn't keeping all the handbills and all the press and all that from that time. But
I was going to say,
but
Don,
the stuff we do have is Lou's stuff, from the Velvet Underground. That would be the difference to me. It's like, this is like Lou's, contracts. It's contracts with his managers and with the band and for a couple of the shows. It's just the things that he did hang on to. And one of the really cool things is right after he left the Velvet Underground, there's some demos of him at his parents' house doing songs that ended up on like the first 4 solo albums.
Right.
So, you see the transition there as well, that period sort of in between that people talk about. So, yeah, it's just everything. In fact, there's tapes. We found one tape that seems to be his high school band rehearsing for the variety show. And after that, he starts singing Bob Dylan songs.
Oh,
is that right?
That's cool.
And it's 2 songs that came out in August 1963, so it would have been about the time, he was at college, maybe,
Yes.
Right.
It's
graduated in 64.
He could,
right.
Yeah, it's probably early 64 when he was, doing these and just trying out some Dylan songs.
Sure.
But he could have been trying them out for Pickwick, too, and maybe they wanted to cut a Dylan album. Like, we don't really know. But it sounds like he was trying out. It's like he wasn't formed yet. That's what's interesting about it. It's like, here's Lou finding his voice. He's not there yet. And then you hear him. So, we've got tapes that go back,
So Don, to put this in a sort of the right kind of context for our listeners in particular, you're a musician and a producer. What influence has Lou Reed had on American contemporary music?
Well, I think Lou was one of the biggest influences on, what became glam and what became like this sort of, sexual revolution that did go on in the country. He was more, he transcended just music, and what how he represented himself, as a drug-taking, bisexual. That was not done at the time, So, I think that he broke a lot of barriers just by doing that. And the fact that Walk on the Wild Side could even get played on the radio.
Yeah, it was shocking to me.
When you know what the lyrics are, that he got away with that is just amazing.
I think it's because a lot of people who were listening to it didn't know what they were listening to.
They didn't. No, I know. That's the literal truth. They didn't know what those lyrics meant, and that's why it got played on the radio. And so that wouldn't have happened otherwise. But he was, he, as they say, the Velvet Underground, so many bands came out of that. But I think in particular, David Bowie, Roxy Music, T-Rex even, it's just like these people, they wanted to be Lou. They were very influenced by Lou, and I think that, so he had an amazing influence across the board, well, and still does, and there's still bands that want to sound like that.
Sure.
Now.
I'm not a musician, but I can tell you back in the day when, when I was contemporaneously listening to Sgt. Pepper's and Blonde on Blonde, and then listen to Velvet Underground do Heroin, I said, this song this music is unlike anything out there. I mean, it was just so off the charts compared to everything else that was being played and listened to. It really would, if I was a musician, it would have had a profound effect on me.
Yeah, I think so. Everyone who was edgy at all just looked at that and thought, like, "Oh my God, how did he just get away with doing that?" There's one like a poetry reading he does on one of the tapes in '71. Again, before he started his solo record, but he kind of talks about this where he says, I was influenced because I heard this guy Bob Dylan could write songs about real things. So I wrote a song about that I thought I could get away with, at the time. And then he said it wasn't so easy. And he's saying and then he said so it was around the time the Beatles wrote "I Want to Hold Your Hand," I wrote "Heroin."
Right.
Yeah, it was that drastic, Well,
I just remember the first time I ever heard the line, "It's my wife and it's my life," just capsulized a whole feeling that I never experienced because I wasn't a heroin addict, but you could relate to what a heroin addict must deal with on a daily basis.
I agree totally, and I think it's because Lou was so literary, and he wanted to be a writer. He wanted to be a poet. I mean, I think that was really important to him to be it's like his influences were people who could tell a story in that way where it was just you were drawn in, and he could do that. He was a heavy writer of words, and I think that's
did he gravitate in that way when he was at Syracuse University?
Delmore Schwartz was a big influence there, and that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to make Delmore think, yeah, I've done well, I'm a good writer. I think that was a big influence for him, and he just he was just an amazing writer. And I think that when you look at those Velvet Underground lyrics, he couldn't understand any of them at the time in the songs. But really looking at them now, it's like, oh my God, this is really complicated. This is heavy, heavy writing,
You know what I think is fascinating is that, the Lou Reed story and the Velvet Underground story was a great, there was a elevator pitch. Here's what it was. It was an encapsulated story. He did this, did this, did this, did this. I want to, I'm very literate. I want to be the literate rock and roll person. I'm going to write the great American novel with rock and roll behind it. But what we're hearing now is a lot of these stories are kind of unfolding, and now these archives are going to accelerate this. You could really see the progression and the timeline very clearly, and these different, milestones in his career, and how he just kept on pushing. He kept on creating and pushing, and that's what I'm fascinated about. I think that that's going to open up a whole new audience for him, which
you're right about that, and there's a lot of other things that he did that most people weren't aware of. He did a lot of theater pieces with Robert Wilson. He did his own photography and put out several books of photography. So it's like all that stuff is now there too for people to sort of explore for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's going to be other things. And Lou was, he was a huge practicer of Tai Chi, and there's a lot of the Tai Chi in the collection as well. His notes and photos of him and ones he took. And so I think, there's many facets of Lou that will be new to people that you find in the collection.
Is there anything in particular, I mean, there's a lot of stuff there, Don, but is there anything in particular that really surprised you or stood out among all of these things?
Well, there was always excitement when we would start the day and be opening boxes and have no idea what we would find.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the moments for me was when we found the Metal Machine Music test pressing, because I in high school I listened to that record a lot on headphones in Berlin with heavy in rotation on my stereo.
Mm-hmm.
But when we found the test pressing, I don't know if you remember the cover art of Metal Machine Music, but in the left-hand corner there's a label, and it's like RCA Records, Master Reference, and Title Artist.
Right.
And that's the label that's on the test pressing. It's like that's where that idea came from. And it doesn't say RCA Records, it says Sterling Sound, because that was the mastering place. And so when I saw that, it was just like the light bulb went off, and I was like, oh my God, this is where this came from.
Don, were you a big fan? I mean, to be involved.
Oh yeah.
So this was really the kid in the candy shop for you, I have to imagine.
No, for some reason, most of the jobs I worked on, like Hunter Thompson and Ken Kesey, it's all stuff I adored when I was a kid and grew up on, really.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, I think it's helpful that I sort of bring that knowledge to it. I look at stuff and pretty much right away know what I'm looking at, in a way. I guess that's good. But yeah, I feel really blessed in that way to be able to work on these collections of stuff that I grew up, loving so much as a kid.
What's the quality of the recordings and the demos? Are they pretty good?
It varies a lot. No, it goes from pretty bad to really good studio, level. So it really varies. It's, they're documents, and I think some would have to be cleaned up more if you're going to use them than others. But I think it shines through what you're hearing on them, without anything really.
So as a collection in the library, how will students or fans or other people access this collection? What's the process?
Well, that's a good question. At the Performing Arts Library at Lincoln Center, where this will be housed, they'll basically, once all the music is digitized, you'll be able to listen to it in-house. They have right now these stations where people come and listen to stuff with headphones. And so that's basically the first way that it will be available. We're already talking to them about the idea of trying to build a listening room somewhere in the building so you can crank it up. And not just loose stuff, but, anything in their collection that they service in there. And they actually like the idea. So we're trying to get a Lou Reed listening room in the library because we need to crank up the sound.
Right.
It's not loud enough just in headphones.
That's great. So it's open to the public now. It was opened on his birthday?
Well, they just got the first delivery. There's actually 2 deliveries of the collection. They got most of the paper first. And that's being processed at a facility they have in Long Island City, and that won't. I mean, it'll be close to a year before the public can actually first start seeing things. But that'll be announced when it happens. I mean, typically with these kind of collections, it can be 2 to 3 years before it gets to the public. But they're really fast tracking Lou's. They're really happy about it, and I think it'll be. I mean, they already did an exhibit. There's exhibits up this week for the next week that were done just to announce the acquisition. They wouldn't normally even do this. Normally they would wait till everything's been, ingested into their system, basically. So, but it'll be, I think, less than a year, maybe by the end of this year, the public can start going in and accessing the files and the folders and seeing what's in there. And then, the audio will be, it's being done now, and then it'll take a few more months probably to process it, and then again, I think early next year, I hope that stuff would be available.
It's a long process. Our guest is Don Fleming, the archivist for the new Lou Reed archive that was acquired by the New York Public Library and is housed where, Don? At the at Lincoln Center and
it's in Lincoln Center at the Library for the Performing Arts. That facility there is actually part of the New York Public Library, even though it's at Lincoln Center.
I have a question. So, you talked a little bit about the commercial uses of the archive, and is that you and Lori and the other archivists in conjunction with the library that are thinking of the different ways to exploit the different the content or the material?
No, that's another good question. The library just has the physical artifacts. They don't have any administrative rights to anything. That's typically the way it works with archives. And there are a lot of different people that have the rights to the material, the IP rights, the intellectual property rights. So part of what we do is try to connect all those dots. Like the people at Lou's label, and right now all the stuff at RCA is all administered by Sony and Rob Santos, who just put out this amazing box set of Lou stuff that he worked with Lou on. So any of the stuff that falls within the years that Lou was under contract to them, they get first dibs on it. So they want to put stuff out. So it's really now us just working with them to say, okay, well, here's what we found. And how about a record of this or this? So, yeah, I think we're going to definitely be, they're excited to do it, and they're the ones who actually get the commercial rights to do it. So that's fine. We'll work with the people who have the right. And then, for example, there's 10,000 photos in the collection by all these famous photographers who took photos of blue. And it's amazing. It's an amazing collection of images. And we don't have the rights to any of them. They're owned by those photographers.
Sure.
So, we have to that's what the library then lets patrons know. They'll say, like, if someone can come look at it, but they can't take a copy and publish it. They can track down the rights. They'll be told, like, here's who you contact for the rights. And then that would be great, if people want to use the material they find in there. But there is always a bit of a administration of the rights that has to be dealt with.
So
but it's not done by the library.
So just to put a fine point on that, so it's RCA/Sony, it's the photographers, it's Warner Brothers / Time. Warner Brothers.
No,
Records.
like Mick Rock with all the Mick Rock photos.
Right.
Like Mick owns the copyright. I mean, with photographers, that's the way it works. Like they own the copyright to their work unless they did it as work for hire at the time. But almost all these guys, especially these great photographers that did photos of blue, that's just the way it works with photographers. They own them. So, that's who people would have to go. Like, we wouldn't be able to say, sure, go ahead and use it. They have to go clear the rights with whoever has it.
Sure.
But, again, the public can just come there and look at everything. You can come look for free.
That's
so
fantastic.
It's a compromise.
That's fantastic.
And it's a step towards that. I mean, the long term is this is the permanent place it's going to stay, and we think it'll be there for hundreds of years. And in not that long a time, it will all be public domain.
Right.
And at that point, then it's in a great place where people can access it and use it all they want. I mean, that's going to be, we won't be
that's
around.
the whole purpose of having a living archive like that.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's the hope, is that it lasts that long and people still want to use it when it gets to that point.
Let me switch gears with you, Don, for a minute. You've had a long music career of your own with groups, a solo career. You've worked on lots of interesting music projects. You've been a producer of many well-known groups, Sonic Youth, Hole, Posies, Alice Cooper, Smithereens. Are you still producing and doing projects on your own?
I produce and play a little bit, but just mostly for my own amusement at this point. It became, when I started doing Alan Lomax work, I just fell into that full time, and at the time, it was just a good fit for me. But I've always continued, do a few projects here and there. I did produce a record that's coming out in a couple of months by a singer named Kim Rancourt, and he's a guy that was in When People Were Shorter and Lived Near the Water, and it's me and Kim and Steve Shelley from Sonic Youth, Gary Lucas on guitar, and Joe Bouchard from Blue Oyster Cult on bass.
Wow, that's a good mix.
Yeah, and it rocks. I mean, I think it's really good, and it's just a bunch of old guys who decided, let's make a record, and Kim's putting it out through his own label, and we'll do a show and have a couple of beers, and, that's the tour. So, yeah, I still play. I mean, to me, it's never really changed. I always did it because I enjoyed it.
Right.
And then it never made sense to me that, musicians can only do that. So I feel like I didn't really change. I did it a lot less. I do it a lot less. But I still play. I'm doing a Irish rock review show this weekend in New York that this guy Joe Hurley puts on every year.
Mm-hmm.
With, a great backing band, and come out and you do one song, and I love those because it's just fun to get together with other people and do a song.
Sure.
So yeah, I play a little bit now and again, but I don't hit the road anymore to do anything.
Well, I'll tell you, I was there this summer when you did the Lou Fest at Lincoln Center in July, Lou Palooza, and that was great. Don fronted a band and helped pull together, what was it? It's like 30 bands just playing Lou songs. Well,
there was a bunch of people on that stage, yeah. I mean, that was a big day. But yeah, that was fun. I mean, I love doing projects like that. again, that are here and within the local area, you know.
It's nice that it's there. It's nice that New York is the home for the Lou Reed Archive. Our guest is Don Fleming, who's overseeing the work of the Lou Reed Archive. Don, tell us a little bit about the Lomax Archive and kind of how you got involved in that and how.
And what's included in that archive?
Just briefly.
The Alan Lomax Archive is really everything that Alan collected from the 1940s till the 1990s, and it's his own personal field recordings, his photographs, and also material that he collected from other people, thousands of hours of world music that he collected from other guys in the field who didn't publish their work. So it's a really amazing collection on its own, even though it's not his own recordings. And Alan was a big pioneer of, pushing the idea of traditional music being important, an important part of the culture. One of the things we do with the material at the Alan Lomax Archive is try to repatriate it to the areas where he recorded it. So we've gone into North Mississippi and worked with local libraries there to put on events and give them copies back of all the music and photos and let them sort of celebrate the idea that Mississippi Fred McDowell, came from our community, and then the Rolling Stones covered one of his songs. It's like people there don't really realize that the growth of what came out of their area a lot of times. So it's an interesting archive in that Alan isn't the artist. He's the
archive. He's the collector.
Yeah, I mean it's everything he documented in his lifetime, and it's like the guy never slept. I mean, it's just there's
it's incredible.
So many hundreds and hundreds of hours of material from every decade. And he went to the Caribbean, he went to Spain, he went to England, he took all these Italy, went there for a year and just traveled around. So, songs of tuna fishermen singing. I mean, Alan just had this amazing knack for knowing, here's the music, the real music before electricity. Before you could play stuff on a jukebox and people stopped singing in their own homes, this is the stuff you sang to each other. And a hit song was something that started in the south of England, and a year later, that same song's being sung in Ireland. It goes, pub to pub, town to town, and then that all ended when records came along. So, but that had gone on for hundreds of years. So it's he had this deep knowledge of what those songs were. That's why when he was in America, he'd go to Appalachia. He would say do you know any songs about King George? Because they did, and those were songs that had come from England. So, he just had a knack for it and just knew how to get the best out of people.
Great.
So it's an amazing collection. And he was a great sound engineer, and all his tapes were just perfect. I mean, it was amazing. He was a really good engineer.
Don, back to the Lou Reed collection for a second. Two things. One is there anything you came across? I know there was a project, a Martin Scorsese project, potentially about a film for Dirty Boulevard, where there was some correspondence about that. But were there any projects that you saw Lou kind of potentially working on that you say, wow, it's a shame that didn't ever come to fruition or make it a commercial, it was commercially available?
I mean, I think that Scorsese project is definitely maybe one of the bigger ones that you would think that, it's too bad that didn't happen. There was a book of poetry that he put together in 1974 that was about 60 pages long, and it was many, many original poems that were unpublished, along with a few that had been published. And there's a letter from whoever I forget the publisher's name they had sent it to, basically saying no, we don't really want to do this right now. And he just, I guess, put it away in a folder, and it sat there until we found it in the box. So that one was exciting because we can put some of that out, But again, oh, this is too bad. These are amazing. Why would anyone say no to this back in the day?
Interesting.
But I mean, I think for the most part, Lou was able to do most of the projects he wanted. I wouldn't say there's tons of that. I think what's more interesting is there's a lot of licensing paperwork, and you see like the multitude of requests that come in, and Lou writing right on the page, yes or no, like making that final decision.
Hey, Don,
you know something? This is an interesting story. When does that date back to, by the way?
I mean, that goes as far back as the 70s. You see that kind of paperwork.
Really? Because I can recall with Lou, especially working with him in the OOs, he used to say all the time, "Do you think we should do this?" There were films coming in and TV shows coming in.
Right.
And
every day. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing you don't realize is like that's his life. I mean, you have to like answer. Every day your assistant is saying, "Oh, they really need an answer, Luke. Can they use this for the Brill commercial?" Or whatever. I mean, he just and most of them he would say no to, and if it seemed exceptional or whatever to him for some reason, I guess he would say yes. And a lot of a lot of people asking, "Can you play our charity event? And can you do this? Will you appear for this? And will you write a note for my book?" I mean, it was kind of endless. So I think you're able to appreciate to some degree why he was cranky.
But he would also, I think, put it through the lens or the filter of, would Bob Dylan do this? Would David Bowie? Seriously, he used to say that. I remember this very vividly. He would say, Dylan, but once Dylan did something, I think it almost gave the opportunity. Okay, he could do that.
Well, was Dylan his sort of muse or whatever?
I don't think he would have ever publicly said that, but I think
I don't either.
No, he would never publicly say, and I don't think he was, but I think that echelon of musicians.
He was a peer. I think
he saw them as peers.
Dylan as a peer, and other people, even like Paul McCartney. I mean, there's letters from Paul. They would send each other test pressings of records and stuff like that sometimes. So there were certain people, I'm sure he would say, like, "Oh, well, so-and-so did this, so I think I can do it now."
Mm-hmm.
But you got to remember it, too. For years there, it was like you were a complete sellout if one of your songs was in any kind of commercial or used.
Sure.
I mean, now it's become like, well, that's the only way to make money as a musician, so that's all you can try to do.
Right.
But back in the day, that was it, you had to question each one.
Right. Were other members of, like, the Velvet Underground, like John Cale and others, aware that he had such an extensive collection? Was this well known, or was this completely a surprise to people that were close to him?
I don't know how big a surprise it was. I mean, I think people, and I don't really know. Like, I mean, I know. I don't think other people have within the band. I guess would have collections quite this size, but I don't really know what John Cale has. He might have a lot of stuff. I don't know that Mo has that much.
Right. I think, and the other thing is Lou's father was an accountant, and I think the one thing that he taught him early on, especially, was, about accounting for all of his work and the value of his work. And
well, that's exactly right. And Meryl, Lou's sister, said that exact thing the other day when we were at the library and talking, at this little press conference thing they did. She pointed that out, that it's like, yeah, that's what my dad taught him to do, was keep that paperwork and,
is there much material in the archives about his I know he didn't have much of a non-musical life, but is there material related to his relationships and marriages and personal dealings that were not music related?
There's really not much personal stuff in it because it really was the collection of his business. It was everything that was at the Sister Ray office, and so we basically had to box all that up, and we made an inventory of everything we were doing, took pictures of everything, did counts of everything. So it was a combination of that material and all this stuff that was in storage space that had been sitting there, some of it since the 70s. So it really wasn't that much personal stuff, except I would say some of his personal collections that weren't at his apartment. There was overflow of his LP collection in the 45. So there were Doc Pomus records and Ornette Coleman and Don Cherry and Dion records and stuff like that is in this collection and actually did go to the library.
Dion
I mean, there's this
DiMucci.
collection of doo-wop 45s, and there's one single in it called Coney Island Baby by The Excellents. And I just thought, well, maybe that's where that came
That's
from.
where that song title came
Sure.
from. Our guest is Don Fleming, archivist for Lou Reed. When we return, we're going to have our final moments with Don, and we'll be right back. Okay, our guest is Don Fleming, archivist for Lou Reed, as well as archivist extraordinaire, producer, performer, and musician.
Don, so what happened to all of Lou's gear and his guitars and all of those things?
Well, all the equipment we still have because it wasn't part of what the library wanted, for one thing, and also Lori really wants to hang on to it a bit longer. There's a lot of equipment there. It's all probably stuff that Lou got within the last 10 or 15 years because he never really hung on to older equipment. And there's no Velvet Underground equipment. I don't even think there's really anything from the early solo records. It's all, really crazy and custom-built stuff that was made for Lou in most cases. It's pretty phenomenal, but it's not the old vintage gear at all. The stuff is still used when they do the drones, which is this live show that Stuart Herwood, who was Lou's guitar tech, and Lou taught him how to set up the drones. It's sort of metal machine music. Basically, he uses 4 guitars and 4 amps, and they're set to a certain pitch, and they're leaned on the amp, and they make the sound, and people come in and basically just trance, just lay down on the floor and fall asleep. It's really weird, and it's really loud. So we actually still use the gear for that, and so I think that's going to go on.
Don, Lou was notorious gearhead, not just in the instruments he played, but he also had the latest video equipment and the latest Betamax in the 70s. And are there any videos, personal home videos that Lou shot that are part of the collection?
Lou is definitely a big gearhead, and not so much video, and there's not a lot of video that looks like that he shot, but mostly photography. Like, he loved his cameras. He had some of the craziest camera equipment, and a little bit of that went to the library in this acquisition, but there's still a lot of it that Lori has, because he had, he talked about his love for his cameras, like how he would, like to him, that was like the magic of taking pictures, was how the camera felt and how the camera looked. So it went from guitars to cameras at some point.
To Tai
but
Chi
not really
swords. To
video
Tai Chi
equipment.
swords. Right, to Tai Chi swords and all sorts of
equipment.
equipment.
Yeah, but that's the other big part of his personal collection, is all the Tai Chi swords, which Lori still has as well. So yeah, a lot of those items that you would think of as being good for display, that's not the type of stuff the library would want. They're looking more for things people can use for research.
Lastly, were there any parts of, was the Andy Warhol friendship and relationship in any way part of, because I know Lou said he never saved any of the prints that Andy gave him.
No, there were none there. There was nothing that we could see that really came from Andy, personally. There was a giant portrait of Andy in drag over Lou's desk, and that did go to the library. So, I mean, there was definitely a connection there, and I think he really loved Andy. But no, there's nothing from Andy at all in the collection.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things.
What was that, Don? What was that?
A bit of a disappointment for us, too, was there really weren't very many lyrics. Like, he didn't hang on to his handwritten lyrics. And we found a bit of stuff from the later days, but nothing, really, from the early days. And we know some of the people who actually have them. He would just give them to people. Like, even though he kept all the paperwork for the tours and all the receipts, he gave away the lyrics.
His music.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
So, that was a bit of a disappointment that there wasn't more of that in there.
In some ways, Lou Reed kind of capsulizes, the sort of what is the essence of music. Music is influenced by all of the other aspects of culture, emotion, ideas, and his music reflect that. But in his reflecting on that, he also influenced culture by the art that he produced as a result of that. So there really was a very symbiotic relationship between the environment he operated in and the effect that he had on that environment.
Yep. Very well put.
Yeah, very well put. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, he transcended just being like a musician in that way, and I think that's one of the things that makes it important to
Don, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show and reminiscing about all this, and we're excited about the new archive, and look forward to talking with you again and you having great success with this.
Is there a website or is there some information our listeners could access to find out more about this?
You know, there's not a whole lot that goes up on it. There is a LouReed.com website, but really the main place to look is the Lou Reed Facebook page and Twitter. That's where most of the information comes out when something's happening.
Wonderful.
So, check the social medias.
Lou would be scared of that. Anyway, thank you. Thanks, Don. You've been a wonderful
guest.
Thank
you. Thanks a lot, guys.
Arnie, I will see you next week. Thank you for listening to What Do You Know?
I can't wait for the next show, Scott.
I'm excited too, Arnie. If you'd like to suggest a guest, send me an email at scottrichmond@townsquaremedia.com. We'll see you next week. And thanks for listening to Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290, 101.5 FM, and newstalkkgvo.com.